Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for attending this conference on the topical issue of cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming and introducing our distinguished guest speaker, Ms. Sundari Khalsa. I did pronounce well. Okay. Professor at the National Intelligence University, known as the Harvard of the intelligence field. She is also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. Welcome, Professor Khalsa, to Romania and to the National Bank of Romania. Sundari Khalsa's background also includes being a professor at the United States Naval Academy, director and instructor of the Marine Corps Military Occupational Specialty Training School, where she trained and certified Marine Corps signals intelligence and electronic warfare officers. She is an expert with field experience in signaling intelligence and information support for integrating military operations. And let me add that her studies also include degrees from Harvard University, John Kennedy School, with additional certification in management, leadership, and decision sciences, University of Virginia, with specialization in chemistry and biochemistry, and New Mexico Military Institute, where she was awarded the Science Scholar Awards in physics and chemistry. Her book, Terrorism and Forecasting, Indicators and Analytical Techniques, is on the CIA's reading list and used in university courses. Her articles and research cover topics such as mutual support for qualitative and quantitative methods in the field of intelligence, or topics related to the debate in the intelligence community about intuition versus structured techniques in prediction and decision-making in conditions of risk and uncertainty. She is also a supporter of structured methods and statistical, cyber, and mathematical analysis in the development of prediction systems. One final thing about her background, very rich background, which I'm certain many of you will find interesting, is that she is a Marine Corps black belt, mixed martial art instructor. She has led the Marine Expeditionary Unit training in martial arts and trained over 200 Marines and certified 60 others to the next higher belt. So, all in all, a very impressive background and a track record. Now, why she's here in the central bank? Professor Sundari Khalsa is visiting the Research Institute of the University of Bucharest. Professor Marian Preda, director of the university, wrote me about this visit. He pointed out that in addition to being a specialist in the development of applications of quantitative and statistical method for predictive information activity, Professor Khalsa has been working recently on matters of blockchain and cryptocurrencies as they influence strategic and national security issues. This is an area that has emerged at the overlap between A, monetary and banking phenomena, B, information technology advances, and increasingly silent, C, geopolitical and geoeconomic developments. Obviously, it is part of our mission here at the National Bank of Romania to monitor, understand, and assess these and related phenomena which may affect both positively and negatively the Romanian monetary system and banking system, and more generally our economy. That being said, the reason we have invited her here today is related to this specific aspect of her more recent work. So far, we have seen blockchain and cryptocurrencies mostly discussed and assessed from the perspective of information technology and economic theory. We are interested at the same time to see how the cryptocurrency problem is also perceived from the perspective of an analysis largely rooted in the experience of intelligence studies and practice, and of an expert in strategic decision-making conditions of risk and uncertainty. We are also interested to see how such an expert is framing the problem of cryptocurrencies as a massive economic challenge to the national economies, a problem requiring a strategic assessment of the alternatives. To see also how an expert in structural analysis may present the issue in a systematic, methodological way. Last but not at least, we are interested in the evaluation which are emerging out of this exercise, including the opportunity as well as the warnings. Here's the title of the presentation: Bitcoin versus central bank digital currency. The most important economic decision nations have ever faced. Analytical frameworks for comparative assessment and strategic decisions. Now, in terms of how we are going to proceed, the event will have two parts. We'll start with the presentation of Professor Carlson for about 40 minutes or so, which will be followed by a questions and answers segment. Now I'd like to invite Professor Carlson to take the floor. Again, I'd like to thank her a lot for being present here in the National Bank of Romania, and thank you very much to all of you for your attention.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for that warm welcome and this opportunity to share this information I'd like to share with you regarding central bank digital currency versus Bitcoin, and my assertion that it's the most important economic decision countries have ever faced. You can see the agenda I have planned for us, and with that, let's begin with a quick orientation. 2 key points. First, an evaluation of digital currencies is crucial for decision makers in national banks and governments, because digital currencies involve 3 key issues that impact strategic resilience: disruptive technology, economic power and security, and national power and security. Second, the importance of the evaluation of digital currencies has increased with the following developments in the last 6 months, which increased the pressure on national banks and regulatory authorities. The latest crypto winter crash, the advent of artificial intelligence, and bank failures. And I will address these issues at some point throughout the talk. But of course, we can circle back to questions about this. Also, two quick disclaimers. First, when I say Bitcoin, I mean Bitcoin or something like it usually. This talk is not intended to be an ad for Bitcoin. This talk is intended to compare the characteristics and implications of Bitcoin and central bank digital currency. And second, this is my individual analysis and does not represent any of my previous institutional affiliations. And last orientation point is just something I'd like to share with you regarding a case where I was surprised. It was a break from expected stereotypical stance in the debate regarding central bank digital currencies. And you might expect that the stance of a central bank decision maker would be to be a proponent of CBDC and an opponent of cryptocurrency. However, at a conference I attended in Harvard in October of 2022, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, Christopher Waller, actually was an opponent of CBDC and a proponent of a particular type of cryptocurrency to better facilitate international settlement. So just something to keep in mind as we try to keep an open mind thinking through an issue critically. All right, so with that, beginning with this introductory point about why this is the most important economic decision. I assert money will be digitized. I think that's no surprise. A new technology, cryptocurrency, was the fastest growing technology in human history until the advent of AI recently. And it is forcing individuals in free societies and governments to face a new dilemma about money. This dilemma, what form of digital money to choose, is the most important economic decision nations have ever faced, and an extremely important national security decision because, one, money is the primary tool of an economy and can destroy an economy and a government if it fails. Two, money is the fundamental tool of maintaining the capabilities of its security forces. So failed money means weak or failed security forces. Three, all nations are facing this decision simultaneously. So the choice has immediate and direct implications in comparison to all other countries. And fourth, never before has society seen money options with such extremely different and severely consequential implications. On one extreme, you have central bank digital currency, where no previous form of money has offered a centralized power, absolute power and control over money. Even if it begins with a benevolent checks and balances, it's inherently vulnerable to abuse of power. On the other extreme is Bitcoin. Never before have we seen a form of previous money that offered individuals near absolute freedom and control of their money. And this has both negative and positive implications. It may be more difficult to hinder criminals, but it protects democracy and freedom because it is highly resistant to abuse of power. Yet many nations and free individuals appear unaware of the implications of the choice, seemingly acting without critically thinking on the choices or avoiding action, thereby failing to act early on the option that is in their best interest, a choice or delay that could be very costly. So three primary options have emerged in this digital currency. First is a central bank digital currency. Second, a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or something like it. And Bitcoin is worth attention over the 20,000 other cryptocurrencies that have emerged because Bitcoin would rank as the largest bank globally if it were a bank. But it's not a bank, it's currency, so putting it in that perspective, it has become the third largest currency in the world as of March 2021, behind the US dollar and euro. Bitcoin has demonstrated the longest running security and resiliency among all cryptocurrencies. I call it thoroughly battle tested and assaulted by hackers for 13 years and never once been counterfeited. Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that has become legal tender in a country, El Salvador and the Central African Republic. Bitcoin has outperformed every other asset class in history by at least a factor of 10. in the decade between 2011 and 2021. So it has gained purchasing power, unlike all other forms of currency that are legal tender. Bitcoin brought about the application of blockchain technology, which solved the double spending problem of digital currency transfer and created other capabilities. So it obtained the first mover advantage, obviously something difficult to displace. And Bitcoin was engineered to fulfill the fundamental properties of a theoretical perfect money. We'll discuss that further in this evaluation of currencies using a scoring system. And then Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that the US has designated a commodity rather than a security, because it is run by a protocol rather than a management team that is theoretically corruptible. And lastly, Bitcoin is the largest blockchain network, having the most nodes in the world. And the larger a blockchain's network, the more nodes it has, the higher security. So the Bitcoin blockchain is the most highly secured blockchain in the world. So that's why it stands out, that's why it's the subject in this case. But of course, when I say Bitcoin, I mean Bitcoin or something like it. All right. And lastly, option 3 is to adopt both. All right, so some nations, China, are opting for CBDC, while others, El Salvador, are opting for Bitcoin, while others are delaying the inevitable choice, perhaps rushing to a choice without critically thinking on it. In October of 2022, 16 countries were working on developing a CBDC. Now, as of April 2023, more than 100 countries are doing so, and that represents more than 95% of global GDP. In May of 2022, 44 countries met with the El Salvador president to discuss how to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender in a developing country. Trade-offs in the choice. With CBDC, the country has a digital money system in which banks and central governments have absolute control over monetary policy, but the country is subject to the errors of human-led decision-making, such as overprinting, which has caused the downfall of numerous nations' currencies in the past. Bitcoin provides a country with a digital money system of fixed, perfectly scarce money. There's a limit of 21 million Bitcoin. So a country does not have the ability to employ monetary policy to increase or decrease the supply of Bitcoin. To assess the implications of each choice, to gain insight on a potential superior winning choice, I use a systematic evaluation of money types using a scoring system and game theory analysis with a focus on national security implications. So with new types of money that have emerged, I'm going to quickly skip through the definitions of central bank digital currency and crypto. What I'd like to spend time on are the comments I have regarding cryptocurrency. So first, as I mentioned, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency to solve the double spending problem. People have been seeking to create digital currencies since the 70s. And blockchain brought about the biggest advance in ledger accounting technology in 700 years. And there are two broad types, though, of cryptocurrency, even though they're both using blockchain. First is a decentralized, shared, controlled cryptocurrency. And in this case, the total supply and other features of the currency are under shared control by the community members, all the nodes involved in this decentralized network. Whereas with a centrally controlled cryptocurrency, the total supply and other features of the crypto are largely controlled by a private central authority. So with this centralized cryptocurrency, critics of this type point out that the properties of the currency can be changed at any time by the central authority, so users don't necessarily know exactly what they're getting. Unlike a decentralized cryptocurrency, which requires some sort of majority community agreement. Critics of this type of crypto also assert that concentrated insider ownership of these types of crypto may permanently impair their blockchain's ability to be a credibly neutral public infrastructure. So you can see here some of the breakouts of the insider ownerships. And since centrally controlled cryptos have management teams that are theoretically corruptible, they and all other altcoins have been designated securities rather than a commodity. Bitcoin is the only one that has been designated a commodity because it is just controlled by a protocol. Old cryptos versus new crypto. Critics of this ever-growing portfolio of 20,000 plus altcoins explain that old crypto had survived and has a proven record of security for 13 years, while new crypto does not. And also, as I mentioned, larger blockchains with more nodes have greater security. Smaller blockchains, typically newer blockchains, have fewer nodes, less security. And lastly, layers can be placed on top of Bitcoin or theoretically any cryptocurrency. It is not impossible for a given crypto to evolve with new capabilities and layers added on top of it. To displace crypto, a new crypto would need to have a significant enough improvement to overcome Bitcoin's first mover advantage and cause people to make the effort to actually make a change. I said I would put this talk in perspective of the recent crypto crash. There's this phenomena, crypto winter or crash, that Bitcoin has self-creating cycle to cause, which other cryptocurrencies tend to follow. Bitcoin's value is highly volatile in a 4-year period. It's also highly volatile just because it's a new technology, but within this 4-year period, or pardon, after any 4-year period, Bitcoin has never been down, and it has in fact been up more than 100% after each of the 4-year cycles. But circling back to just any new technology and the volatility it involves, as any new technology follows its S adoption curve, while it's not highly adopted, it's extremely volatile. As it climbs its adoption curve, it becomes less volatile, and then once it's reached maximum adoption within a society, it becomes far less volatile. To gain insight on where we are and will be with Bitcoin, these are some numbers to track. The last Bitcoin will be mined in approximately 2140, so quite a while, but we're already at 19 million out of the 21 million Bitcoin because of this halving algorithm, where every 4 years the supply rate of Bitcoin is cut in half. And as you can see, this pattern has emerged because of that. When the supply rate gets cut in half, and if the demand remains the same or go up, you have this extreme spike, and then it self-corrects, and you can see this pattern that has emerged. Here's another perspective showing you that in its highly volatile state, you can still see, though, the Bitcoin price at the date of each halving has increased by more than 100% in each case. You can see here also the lowest point, the lowest price within any given 4-year period, and the highest price within any given 4-year period. And this is the pattern for the first halving cycle, starting at a low number, definitely spikes very high, but then ends at a higher number. And then the same thing for the next 2 out of the 3 halvings that we've seen. Here's another analysis of Bitcoin as an asset class compared to other asset classes. And over the decade between 2011 and 2021, Bitcoin produced an average annual return of 230%, beating out all the other asset classes by 10%. All right, so that's why Bitcoin is standing out in this discussion. All right. A new question people are asking: how may AI affect the characteristics and performance of a digital currency? Well, I would say AI is unable to change what Bitcoin is. It doesn't change the consensus mechanism of Bitcoin, and it doesn't change the total number of Bitcoin that will exist. How might it affect a central bank digital currency? Well, it could be used to inform decisions on how to employ monetary policy. It could also be used to make decisions on how to employ monetary policy, and it could be used in other unforeseen ways. All right, so I'm going to expedite this discussion of a brief history of money, because I do think this audience is quite familiar with that. So just touching on the point, currency failure has toppled dozens of governments. Societies have used many things for money, but all of which have failed to meet society's needs for one reason or another. A common reason they have failed is because it turned out they weren't scarce among all societies that encountered each other. Gold was the best thing society found to use for money for 5,000 years, but gold has been troublesome in a few characteristics, which is divisibility. Paying for a cup of coffee with gold dust wouldn't work out very well, and the transportability problem. It would require a large amount of gold for large purchases, heavy amounts of gold. So, complicating mankind's search for a perfect money, the debate, this debate that emerged over whether scarcity of money is harmful or helpful to an economy. I will skip over the debate and just say that when we move forward to more recent history, we have where the US dollar has been unpegged from gold, so we do not have this scarcity control that existed for a while with paper money. And so governments have been able to print more promissory notes than gold holdings, and governments historically inevitably print more money when they want more money than taxes can provide. So it's a human error in our decision making that evolves in most every form of representative money of gold. And this has perhaps resulted in this pattern. Since the 1400s, there have been 6 world reserve currencies, each lasting approximately 100 years. And the US dollar is reaching that mark. So with that observation in mind, that brings us to a potential turning point about money and geoeconomics. This is the moment, I would say, to establish goals and evaluate choices based on those goals and prepare for potentially inevitable developments. My analysis compares the various types of digital currencies against key past types of money. And to assess the implications of each choice, as I mentioned, I will do this systematic evaluation of money types using a scoring system and a game theory analysis. So with that, let's go to this systematic evaluation. What you see in the top row is on the right is various forms of money. You can see gold, fiat paper money, fiat central bank digital currency, then Bitcoin or something like it with those properties, and then centrally controlled cryptocurrencies. So I'll compare and contrast those. So beginning with these fundamental characteristics of a theoretical perfect money, or a perfect tool, if we imagine money as a tool to enable the transfer, preservation, and measurement of purchasing power. We have first this subcategory of intrinsic properties that provide intrinsic and instrument of value. Number 1, scarcity. So its value is not degraded or debased with the addition of more units to the total supply. While being scarce, there must also be enough for a growing number of people to possess some, which is a difficult combination of properties to find. Second, scalable, so it can support a growing number of people. Platinum fails on this characteristic because it's too rare to generate enough coins to circulate to all 8 billion people on the planet. Note, if a money is infinitely divisible, it is infinitely scalable without diminishing its purchasing power. So that brings us to divisible. So it can be used in large and small values, and so it can be scalable without reducing purchasing power. Gold fails on this characteristic because gold dust would be required to pay for a cup of coffee. Fungible. Interchangeable with one another, so it can be used as an accurate measurement of monetary value. Goats fail on this characteristics because different goats have differing values based on their milk production and meat quantity. Counterfeit proof, so it can remain scarce. Paper dollars do not fulfill this characteristic fully because they have been counterfeited many times. And then we have durable, so its value is not lost over time. Tulips and livestock fail on this characteristic because they won't preserve value over decades. And then then we have transferable, so it can be used in the exchange of goods and services. Gold fails on this characteristics because it is heavy and expensive to move in large quantities. And then we have verifiable information. This one I add to the list. I would say this is not traditionally what you would see, but I add this to the list because if you think about it, any money does provide you some level of information about these characteristics, and that is intrinsic to the money itself. So this provides scarcity. This provides you information on whether it is in fact scarce and has these other characteristics. And how important is it for you to know this? How important is it for you to know to have verifiable information on all these other 7 characteristics? For example, how important is it to you to know how much money is in your account compared to the total money supply? One more characteristic at this fundamental level, I would say, is commodity or product backing its value. And this provides this instrumental or intrinsic value, but this is in a particular environment. Those previous characteristics are what you have in any environment. This one will change depending on the environment. So, for example, food and water are more likely to be more valuable than gold or Bitcoin for a person stranded on a desert island. Paper is likely to be more valuable than gold or Bitcoin for a person who needs fire in a cold environment. And gold is likely to be more valuable than water in modern society, and I'd say the same thing about verifiable information. Information has become very expensive in modern society. And I'd say all money types provide some level of information verifiability on the intrinsic properties of money. So how do you verify the information about money? Well, it can be provided via institutional government backing, such as U.S. national power and social institutional trust that is backed to the U.S. dollar, or could be provided via technology, such as blockchain technology, where it's a transparent, immutable, decentralized digital ledger. And in other words, you could say it can be provided via a product, such as a government, or via a commodity, such as a technology. All right, so those would be the fundamental characteristics, and those influence whether or not you get these secondary characteristics, whether or not the population accepts it, if those other characteristics are good. Over time, whether it becomes non-volatile with the more people adopting it. And then government approval backing. Some game-changing characteristics that I think are highlighted with digital currency is this, with blockchain, a single, accurate, immutable, transparent, cryptographically secured digital ledger. Also, we have a secure first base settlement layer is an issue that we care about, and then a fast first base settlement layer. These are issues I would also say are commonly misunderstood. People will say, for example, Bitcoin or something like it is very slow to confirm a transaction. It takes about 40 minutes to confirm on a blockchain, on the Bitcoin blockchain. Whereas with a credit card, you get your transaction confirmed within seconds. But that's an unfair comparison, because a credit card is a second settlement layer on top of the traditional banking system's first settlement layer, which actually takes possibly days if it's banks within the same country, or weeks if it's banks from different countries. Whereas with Bitcoin, you get international settlement within 40 minutes. Now, you can layer credit cards on top of Bitcoin's first settlement layer, just like you can do on the traditional banking system's first settlement layer. And already layered on top of Bitcoin is something called the Lightning Network, which also expedites it to seconds. All right, then we have the second settlement layer and the evaluation of whether it's secure and fast. You can see the evaluations there. And then I would just like to touch on environmentally friendly, which people bring up. Bitcoin miners have a financial incentive to buy cheap energy, which has made Bitcoin a top driver of infrastructure to harness cheap, stranded, renewable energy. El Salvador, for example, is using its volcano energy to mine Bitcoin. Additionally, when Bitcoin miners buy stranded energy that the local population doesn't want, they end up stabilizing energy prices for the local population during timeframes where the population does want energy and there isn't stranded energy. So Bitcoin is promoting this renewable energy because of a financial incentive. CBDC lacks that financial incentive. Other characteristics, smart contracting and contract enabling, you can see these. Time will tell if new layers on Bitcoin or other adds capabilities such as smart contracts. And lastly, putting this evaluation in key U.S. policy goal characteristics. If the goal is to maintain the U.S. fiat dollar status as a world reserve currency as long as possible, this is my evaluation of what would help that and what would harm that. And then the question of enabling monetary policy. You do not have that with Bitcoin, and I would say, is this a good or a bad thing in your opinion? And that concludes the systematic evaluation. Let's go now to the game theory analysis. This I put under academic scrutiny at Harvard, and so this was the research question. In the strategic competition between China and the US for global economic power, will early adoption of CBDC, Bitcoin, or both as legal tender currency yield the greatest payoffs? So just simplifying this question in this game theory, this is what I evaluated for payoffs. The players were China and the US, and then there were also environmental effects where citizens could react to those choices. In this game, timing is important, so I made it a sequential timing rather than simultaneous. Each player gets to benefit from the information of the other player's choice and the environmental effects after that choice. And this is the information that I assess is available at the time of each choice in each round in the game. In the first round of the game, I assess the US fiat dollar as it is, the world reserve currency status, and in the second round, Bitcoin being the most common currency in the world. So here are the actions that each player could potentially take. Both China and the US have the potential action of adopting CBDC only as legal tender, or Bitcoin only as legal tender, or both as legal tender. And citizens, this environmental effect, have two choices. They can place their wealth in Bitcoin, or they can place their wealth in central bank digital currency. Here's the assumptions I made about the actors and their environmental effects. I'm actually going to do a more detailed discussion of this at the end, so I'm going to just let you glance at this right now, but I'll talk through these concepts in more detail after. One point I'd like to highlight here, though, is that in the game theory, there will be other countries that permit Bitcoin if one country is to ban it. Okay, so assumptions about the payoff factors and variables. To discipline the analysis of this problem, I identified 7 total variables and the potential values they could take on, and then a formula that I used to calculate the total payoffs. For example, the first variable is the benefit of controlling monetary policy. For each variable, I placed it on a scale of -1 to +1, so it's a value of 0 if there's no benefit, and if you make a choice that doesn't give you a benefit or a loss, and then a negative value somewhere from 0 to -1, or a positive value somewhere from 0 to +1, depending on if it's going to be a loss or a gain. Here are 2 other variables: the benefit of controlling the world reserve currency, the cost of not operating in the world's most widely used currency. And you can see these other variables that I placed here. Now, I do think there are certainly more variables than these 7 at play, but this is just an example of how to structure the analysis, an example of how I calculated these payoffs. 3 game trees. The first sequential game 3 calculates the payoffs between China's round 1 action versus the US's round 1 action. And you can see at the beginning, China has 3 choices, and you can see each path that for each choice that China makes, what the two potential environmental effects are, the citizens' reactions out of each of those three choices China can make, and then comes the US choice, and again it has three options for the choice. And you can see the payoff factors shown at the bottom, which are the values that I determined from the values I showed you for each of the variables and the values they could take on depending on the choice that was made. And in this particular case, I simply added up the 7 variables without giving a weighted ranking to any particular variable, but certainly you could give a weighted ranking for the variables as you saw fit. Here's the second round, which is the US's first round action compared to China's second round action. And implications from this are that China's second round action has a chance to beat the US's first round action under those conditions I described. And China's second round action does not beat the US if the US adopts both CBDC and Bitcoin. A possible action that wasn't explored in the game was continuing to use paper money, which would not incur the expense and the cost of creating a CBDC and could theoretically maintain the use and the status of the US dollar as a world reserve currency longer. So that is an insight that came out of that second round. And now in this third game tree, this is China's round 2 versus the US's round 2. And the implication from this is that in this case, Bitcoin is the world's most common currency, and the US would yield the greatest payoffs by adopting Bitcoin only in this particular environment. And to maintain a competitive edge, you can see that the game suggests the US should adopt Bitcoin early in order to yield the greatest payoffs. But as I said, continue to use the paper dollar for as long as possible. So here's another way to view the results, I think, in a table that might be easier for some. This is an example. The table would go on. This shows the payoffs for China in 3 choices, and I didn't lay them all out here, but you could view them that way. So this is where I really want to focus on the game theory. The takeaways for the US. The ranking of the payoffs from best to worst are the following. Maintaining use of paper dollar while purchasing or mining Bitcoin or something like it for treasury reserves yielded the greatest payoffs. Adopting CBDC only, the lowest payoffs. To maximize profits, the game suggests the US should, during round 1, when the US dollar is the world reserve currency, continue and encourage the use of paper dollar and not adopt CBDC, because it would likely cause people to distrust and flee the US dollar, and it would be expensive to create, and then accumulate Bitcoin or something like it early before there is a potential for mere tied payoffs with China in round 2. And then during round 2, when Bitcoin is the world reserve currency or the most commonly used currency, adopt Bitcoin or something like it. And then to facilitate a smooth transition for any currency transition, adopt both currencies, the old and the new, simultaneously, to facilitate that transition smoothly. China, on the other hand, has this interesting dilemma. Its authoritarian tradition suggests it would want to fully adopt a central bank digital currency, the path that's currently going down. But the game poses a scenario where the costs of capital flight and political unrest could end up undermining that in the long run. So this is, I think, the comparison that will help you see the justification of these choices and the values that I assigned. A CBDC, in this case, free individuals are likely to avoid or flee a CBDC due to the absolute power and lack of privacy that a CBDC gives to a centralized power over money. This is my assessments. You can judge whether you agree with these as we go through them. On the other hand, Bitcoin, sets this scenario in my mind. Free individuals are more likely to place their purchasing power in Bitcoin or something like it because it provides freedom and pseudo-anonymity in its use. Because there is a minimal expense to print new CBDC, and because countries historically and inevitably print more money when they want more money than taxes can provide, countries are unlikely to place a cap on the total supply of a CBDC. So, since it's likely to decrease in value over time. On the other hand, because of the high expense to print new Bitcoin and because of the battle-tested algorithm that limits the total supply to 21 million and the inability so far to counterfeit it, countries are unable to overprint it. Use of CBDC in international transactions would incur currency exchange costs. Except for countries that are, of course, might be sharing the same CBDC, whereas use of Bitcoin in international transactions does not incur currency exchange costs. It's unlikely a particular CBDC would achieve world reserve currency status because it's unlikely all countries would agree to submit to the same central authority that would control a particular CBDC. Whereas with Bitcoin, there's a decent chance Bitcoin could become the world reserve currency. It has become the largest currency in the world by market capitalization in the 12 years since its existence, and it achieved that status without any government backing or promotion, but rather in the face or midst of government restrictions. If a particular CBDC became the world reserve currency, though, I'm saying I think it's unlikely, but consider the scenario where it does, it would allow a central entity to dominate the world's monetary system. If Bitcoin became the world reserve currency, it would not allow that because Bitcoin doesn't allow any country or entity to control its total supply. It's determined by an algorithm. So it creates an even playing field. Countries that mandate CBDC as legal tender are likely to provoke revolts. Countries that mandate Bitcoin as legal tender are unlikely to provoke revolts. Countries that ban Bitcoin are likely to lose their wealth to countries that permit Bitcoin. Countries that ban CBDC are unlikely to lose their wealth to countries that use CBDC. I say there's a remote chance that lack of a US CBDC dollar would cause people to move to another CBDC or China's CBDC and thus threaten and shorten the US dollar's span as a world reserve currency. And I think there's a likely chance that a US CBDC dollar would push people away from the US dollar. CBDC maximizes a government's power to employ traditional monetary policy. Bitcoin limits, denies governments that power. And CBDC monetary system is expensive to create, requiring new infrastructure and software, and it has an unproven security record. Government systems get hacked all the time. Do you really think the engineers of a CBDC would do better than the engineers of Bitcoin, which has been withstanding attacks by hackers for 13 years? CBDC has no record of security from hackers. Bitcoin has that 13-year record. Money spent on creating a CBDC would not be used to purchase Bitcoin for a country's treasury reserves, whereas money not spent on a CBDC could theoretically be used for that, for Bitcoin or something like it. And it relies on hundreds or thousands of banks' various disparate, opaque, centralized digital ledgers on the CBDC side, whereas with Bitcoin it's a single truth, update as you go, tamper-evident digital record, transparent. All right, one question people have about these is that quantum computing could disrupt these digital currencies. Certainly that's the case. It could disrupt both of them. I think the question is, will quantum computing figure out decryption first or encryption first? If it figures out decryption first, obviously that's a dangerous scenario where we don't have functioning encryption. But if it figures out encryption first, then it's not an impact here. So What is the superior winning option? I'm going to start going faster here. Rather than give you my assessed answer, my intent here today is to alert you to this question and its imminent significance. Give you a framework for evaluation, researched information, and technological explanations to better enable your own critical thinking on the question. And I would offer 2 warnings. 1, warning failures are rarely due to inadequate collection, are more frequently due to poor analysis, and are most often due to decision makers ignoring intelligence. So, as thinking through a problem, consider that point. And then second, decision-making biases cause smart people to make mistakes. Studies show frequently groups of smart, well-motivated people agree on the wrong solution. They didn't fail because they were stupid. They failed because they followed a poor process in arriving at their decisions. So a combination of intuition and structured technique in a systematic process is better than intuition alone. It's been shown to outperform them in studies. And this should be in any topic that you're interested in, should be an ongoing analysis, and following are some factors that I think can be brought into the analysis as data becomes available. Bitcoin enthusiasts claim that Bitcoin will limit war, promote peace, reduce poverty, and reduce corruption. We've got 10 years of data, so I've done a quantitative study here, and this is the information we can track to see if this is a true claim. You can ask me about that if you're interested. Next, there's decision-making biases in influencing people's choices. This is where we make mistakes. And lastly, implications and conclusions. Potential questions to ask to prepare for a world of digital currencies. Obviously, central banks have a huge role in this. Questions to develop, but how can decision makers best identify and evaluate their options in preparing for a world of digital currencies? If a systematic evaluation is used to feed systematic development of courses of action, then the value of the systematic evaluation could be completely lost, and if you do not use it to feed a systematic development of courses of action. So you can't just do a systematic evaluation and then not do a systematic development of courses of action and expect that you won't possibly lose the value of the evaluation when it comes to making the decision. So you need to do both systematically. When decision makers require both systematic evaluation and development of courses, they have a better chance of making smarter decisions. An example of systematic process to develop and evaluate potential courses of action involve the following tasks. Identify 3 key types of situations, environments, conditions, competitor actions that might emerge. The most likely, the most dangerous, and this is per U.S. doctrine and government policy action development. And then I add a third one, the most desired. And I add this because you might have the ability to conduct influencing operations to induce this situation or environment. And then next, identify the ends, what we call ends, ways, and means. Those are objectives, courses of action, and instruments. For each potential objective, identify pros and cons. For each potential combination of courses of action and instruments, identify pros and cons. Simulation or wargaming lessons learned. Measurements of performance, measurements of effectiveness to track results. And here's a template, for example, on how you could organize and discipline this approach to developing courses of action. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you for your time.
Professor Kalsa, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Probably is the overwhelming presentation with such more details. I will open the floor for people from this room to make comments, to ask questions, or just to reflect as you invited us on this issue. Daniel, I will let you indicate the person which is.
All right, thank you.
Very exciting presentation. And for me, I'll be very candid, surprising, and I'll tell you why. And I could easily make an analogy with gold. You could argue, yes, but the quantity of gold has no limit yet, whereas here there is a limited quantity of bitcoins. By the way, I do not share the view this is a currency. It's not a currency. It's an asset. And it's highly speculative, and for this very reason, in my view, it has hardly reasonable chances of supplanting the US dollar or the euro and so on and so on. But I would also say something. I'd say the way you presented everything, it's like, I would say it's a very libertarian view. We need a Bitcoin, this what you call cryptocurrencies, because they are not under control of governments. Governments are stupid, erratic, they use monetary policy in an abusive way, and so on and so on. With all due respect, this is one-sided presentation. And I don't think it's fair. Take, for example, the pandemic. Take, for example, the energy crisis. Take, for example, the global financial crisis. There was no way to avert the collapse of the financial systems without QE. So that was not abusive, irresponsible expansion of base money. So, and secondly, I think, and this is something which is not related, whether we accept Bitcoin as a legal tender or not, it's the nature of banking. The turbulences in banking, in our financial systems, are related to the way our banking systems do function. And to believe that the way to solve all this, to preclude the intrusion of governments by promoting Bitcoin, and I think it's very far-fetched from the reality. And ultimately, whatever the choices are, I believe that the competition between the United States and China as the big rivals in the global economy hinges on economic power. And economic power does not hinge on whether we have a US dollar as the legal tender or the Bitcoin as the legal tender. So we should also ask ourselves, why El Salvador? Why El Salvador? So again, very interesting, very exciting, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't believe that this is the wave of the future. We may have digital currencies, but not Bitcoins, not Ethereum. These are not currencies, in my view.
Thank you. And I will also say I agree with you regarding not a currency. I use the word as it's a cryptocurrency with that word, and it's clearly extremely volatile. It's not functioning as a currency or a accurate measure of purchasing power by any means with its volatility right now. So agree with you on that as well. Yes, this is something a country has already done, so I'm addressing the question of how does it play out in the long run. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to advocate for one versus the other. You are correct in pointing out that there's a debate here about whether or not it's better to have a currency that is able to increase in supply versus not increase in supply. And people will have different opinions on that debate. So my goal is to provide people a method to structure their opinions on that and lay it out. Thank you, and I appreciate it.
Can you hear me? No.
Yes.
Yes, I think that the discussion is a little bit, the comparison is a little bit too big to do it now. Why? Because the decision is already taken. I understand that the United States will migrate to the CBDC 1st of July this year. So I fully understand the comparison and I fully agree with your comparison, but as Daniel said, Bitcoin is not, cannot be a legal tender, yeah, because even it increased massively, but today, yeah, it is. I will take. I just read a report from the Central European Bank, which says that the total holdings in Bitcoin in Europe are 3.5 billion euros, yeah, which is absolutely nothing. Yeah, I guess that the Hungarian currency is even more present in the European banking system. Secondly, 2.5 billion euros of Bitcoin, not Bitcoins, yeah, are also present. So it's not a legal tender. Bitcoin is an asset. I fully agree to Daniel because it is something you invest in or a refuge currency. Yeah, this is what we saw on Silicon Valley Bank. Yeah, all the cash outflows went into two directions, which is the finance behavioral science should explain to us, because we have two banks, Signature Bank and Silicon Valley, which were bankrupt exactly because of two things: Bitcoins and T-bonds. Yeah, do you know where these outflows went? Exactly in Bitcoins and T-bills, which is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah, but coming back, it's an investment currency. That's perfect. But is it a real trading? The volatility of the Bitcoin makes it completely unsuitable for international trading. Yeah, no trader in the world would like to have such a volatility on day-to-day trades. So if tomorrow, let's say, someone would promise the stability, yeah, the lack of volatility of this, yeah, taking into account the current blockchain, can really Bitcoin replace dollars or euros in the international trade? In my opinion, no way. Yeah. So, secondly, yeah, one of the reasons you pointed out there, but of course it's coming from the Bitcoin producers, is lack of corruption. Sorry, what I read in the report of the Central European Bank is exactly that is currency number one for international crime. Yeah, all the ransomwares of the big guys in IT are exclusively in Bitcoin. Yeah, all the money laundering taking part today from mafia, from all the international criminal gangs, and even for all the secret services, I repeat, all the hidden money paid by the secret services are, guess what, in Bitcoin. Yeah, so does it make a more moral currency in the world now? So I would say that even if they are produced in the same way and we understand the blockchain behind is the same, they are exactly the two flips of the same coin. So one is very liberal, cannot be controlled by anyone, Bitcoin, yeah, but also very volatile, very criminal, I said it again, and way too small, yeah, to serve the interest. I have another question for you. Would you ever take a loan in Bitcoin in your life?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Would you ever take a loan in Bitcoin in your life? And not because of the interest, because of the high volatility. We've seen that model in Romania related to the Swiss francs. We all remember. So what killed all the borrowers was not the interest rate, was exactly the FX rate. Yeah, and in other words, you know, the price of the Bitcoin. So would you take the risk of having to pay back in Bitcoin?
So,
A loan,
yeah,
a mortgage loan, whatever.
sure. Do you mind if I try to keep this talk on the systematic evaluation of them rather than my personal, what my personal choices would be? I will be happy to address your issue about the criminal element. Thank you. Yeah, you make an excellent point about the extensive use on the criminals using it. I think generally speaking, criminals and individuals are quicker to use and exploit new technologies than governments and institutions. So they got at it first. Governments are more aware of it now, and methods are being used to track cryptocurrency payments. In fact, a cryptocurrency transfer is forever captured on a blockchain. So in many cases, tracking Bitcoin has been, or tracking payments has been enabled with a blockchain easier than fiat money, because you've got to get search warrants and cooperation from banks to follow the path, whereas on the blockchain it's like instantaneous. Now there are mixers which can make it, obfuscate it, block, you know, cut the path that you're trying to follow. But that is actually one of the questions I bring up in going forward, looking at how government can better hinder criminals, assuming cryptocurrency will continue to be used. And I do believe government does many good things, to your point. And some of the regulations that have already been coming out is the onboarding ramps to crypto. The exchanges in the United States, they're required to demand KYC. So that's an example of government getting involved in finding ways to,
absolutely, but sorry, I really think that basically we are comparing apples to pears. Why? Because one currency, Bitcoin, is exactly created not to be followed, let's say, yeah? So in other words, you cannot trace payment in that currency. CBDC is exactly created, yeah, not to track the payment, even to program the payment.
Yes.
Yeah? We all know that you can, in the new CBDC, you will be able to stop certain payments, or to reduce, or to stop exposures even on some commodities, yeah? Because you very well said, Bitcoin is depending on only one commodity, which is energy. Yeah, but that gives on one hand volatility, the very high volatility, because when the price of energy exploded, yeah, this is what we see. Secondly, maybe we should take into account exactly all the commodities, because gold failed. Yeah, we remember in 1944. At Bretton Woods, it was decided that $35 is costing 1 ounce of gold. Today, you know exactly what the price is $2,000 exactly for 1 ounce. And that's exactly the devaluation of the gold, of the dollars against the gold since 71, correct? Yeah, so maybe, not maybe, obviously, we have to introduce a large mass of commodities in order to make it sustainable and less volatile. So I think this decision is made already that in fact, what US is going to do, and the fact that they decided to peg it to silver, to the SOFAL thing, we know that 30th of June, the LIBOR will cease to exist. Yeah? And in the end, yeah, it's going to link to a much more stable commodity. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're waiting, I just also wanted to mention that cash provides more anonymity than a Bitcoin transaction that's recorded on the blockchain. So there's opportunities to, get at criminals in new ways on the blockchain, and I just think it's important for us to look at those. Yes.
So by advocating Bitcoin, essentially, in my opinion, please correct me if I'm wrong, you are preaching giving up to a monetary policy. Because actually, if we have Bitcoin around, essentially central banks no longer have the tools of monetary policy. Question is, how do you think the world can navigate through business cycles and financial crises without monetary policy? Thank you.
Thank you. So this, I think, circles to the debate on whether monetary policy is helpful or harmful. And I'm not trying to give you a position on the debate. I'm trying to point out which money, I guess, acts in a way that favors one side of the debate and which money acts in a way or functions in a way that favors the other side of the debate. And I would, I suppose, refer you to the experts who have debated that for a long time to explain why they think that monetary policy might be harmful. And generally speaking in life, I think there's balances that are important to find. So, but I don't want to give a personal opinion. I want to just point out which ones favor one side of the debate versus the other, or act in a way that enables one side versus the other, if that's okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tudor Iliescu. I've been reading about Bitcoin for the past 10 years, and I think this is probably the best institutional presentation to an institutional audience that I've seen. I haven't read Jason Lowery's software book that's just been released recently. I have a few comments as a criticism of your presentation or understanding of Bitcoin. First of all, from the technical perspective, there was an inflation bug in Bitcoin that was released into the wild, and then the programmers went back and fixed it. And at some point, there were billions of Bitcoins issued, and I think this is a risk that should be taken into consideration. Secondly, I think there's no Bitcoin community and there's no shared control. There's individual control of your Bitcoin node. And we shouldn't look at Bitcoin users as a community the same way we don't look at maybe cash users as a community or other asset users. Also looking at prices and fluctuations of pricing and trends as technical analysis, I think this is more like astrology, and the fact that Bitcoin has risen every 4 years doesn't mean that it will rise again in the next 4 years. And stating this and then being proven wrong basically invalidates other points that we've been making. Also, I think AI could be successfully used to social engineer the use of fiat currencies or other currencies or even Bitcoin. So I think it should be taken into account because it provides a lot of capability in terms of social engineering. In terms of comparison, you said Bitcoin is fungible. You marked it as high, I think. It's definitely not fungible. It's the opposite of fungible. In terms of privacy, you've already mentioned that cash is more private than Bitcoin, for sure. Also, gold is still more private than Bitcoin. And if you look at things that have happened with the current banking system, if you look at Wirecard and how it's been caught off guard, if you look at even closer to Romania, with the $1 billion heist in Moldova that's still been unsolved, that went through the banking system. So if you look at criminals using a means of transfer, they're using cash, they're using maybe even gold, they're definitely using the current banking system, and if they want to resort to using cryptocurrencies, they do have Monero. So the dark web uses Monero as a default currency because that's actually fungible, unlike Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is quite transparent in terms of that. You said that countries adopting Bitcoin will not provoke revolts. I think that's not true, both for environmental reasons and geopolitical reasons. So if you look at El Salvador, there was public backlash against Bitcoin because people did not understand it, and rightfully so, I think. And also there's international backlash. For example, the IMF had a very quick reaction to Bukele's announcement of adopting Bitcoin as a legal currency. And also, if you look at the countries that are adopting currencies, they're more authoritarian, they're more corrupt. So it's not just El Salvador. When Central African Republic announced adopting Bitcoin without having all the legislation in place, and then the Constitutional Court basically saying it's not true, we haven't adopted it yet. This doesn't is not something that's in favor of Bitcoin. As for Bitcoin as a currency, although it's clear it doesn't have all the attributes. So some people say it's not a store of value. It might not be even a good means of transfer, and it's definitely not a unit of account yet. From a technical perspective, it's not a currency. From international law perspective, it is a currency because it's been adopted as a legal tender in at least one country. So if you say Bitcoin is not, we shouldn't recognize Bitcoin as a currency, you're basically saying we should not recognize another sovereign's currency. So that's a more legal point that I won't go into because I'm not. And also, there are some UN organizations that basically analyze the level of criminality happening on Bitcoin, and they said it's less than 5%. So more than 95, I think it's 3%, but definitely less than 5%. So more than 95% of transactions happening on Bitcoin are legal, are transparent, and we have AML and KYC tying them to specific people and entities and so on. So these were my comments, and thank you again for the presentation. It was surprising and very insightful. And again, I think it's worth highlighting the fact that it's a framework. It's not a proposal to adopt Bitcoin. It's a framework where we can all put our own opinions and say, look, based on this framework, I think it's worth it more to adopt Bitcoin or refuse Bitcoin or ban Bitcoin or whatever. But I think it's the framework itself is just a tool.
Thank you. Thank you for your compliment and then the time you took to write out all those specific points. That's really awesome. I'll address some of them. Many things you said I agree with, and then many things I will maybe give you my perspective on it. Regarding the shared control, I agree with you that it's individual self-custody, controlling your own individual Bitcoin that you have in your account, for which you own the private key. But for the shared control, what I mean by that is if a new upgrade is proposed to the Bitcoin network, the nodes on the Bitcoin network have the ability to accept or reject that upgrade. And that upgrade happens if they accept it. So it's a community of shared consent in that respect. And that's what I meant by that one. Regarding its, the point about the fact that it has increased in these particular 4-year periods doesn't necessarily it's going to increase in value for following 4-year periods. Absolutely agree. I don't know the future. My point is my intent about the 4-year periods was to describe how the halving cycle of its supply, how the halving of its supply every 4 years creates this additional volatility in it. Because volatility is obviously something that doesn't work for a currency. So El Salvador, I'm sure, is going to continue to struggle with that. volatilities that's created by the halvings. Is it possible it will become non-volatile in our lifetimes? I think it has no chance of being a currency while it's this volatile. And as you point out, somebody's already chosen to make it a currency. So using that word judiciously, but I don't know how, that's a question of how long does it take to, if it ever reaches maximum adoption, because some technologies never climb all the way up the S-curve and they never reach the top part. But if it were to do so, and the halving cycle is now so minuscule, then maybe it would be non-volatile. Would that be in our lifetimes? I don't know. But the main point about that wasn't that it's increasing in value, it's addressing the volatility issue. Thank you. And as far as the AI influence goes, I won't even disagree with you there, simply because I just think a lot of us can't even comprehend or foresee the way AI might influence things. And as far as fungible goes, maybe I'm not sure exactly why you would say it's non-fungible. Maybe because you buy it at one price and you're trying to give it out at another, but like one Bitcoin is identical to another Bitcoin, except this new capability that came out with ordinals, where you can attach data to a particular Bitcoin, and that will actually make it, you can already attach a small amount of data, like 83 bytes of data, to a transaction, but it will be erased. It can be erased as metadata for a transaction. People can send messages in Bitcoin or whatever as part of sending a transaction. The transaction itself, the movement of Bitcoin and the amount that moved from where to where, is never erased from the blockchain, but the message that somebody attaches as metadata can be cut off the blockchain if somebody's trying to save space and store a smaller version of the blockchain. And some people store the full version with all the messages. But there's a new type of data that can be attached to Bitcoin based on ordinals, where every Bitcoin has a number and the sequence that it was produced. And if somebody's attaching an image to one and a different image to another, well, now they're not identical anymore. So that would mean they're not fungible. Would that cause people to consider them to have different value? I guess we'll see how that plays out. Anyway, so that's my take on the fungibility. As far as privacy goes, I'm not sure I remember your point, but yes, Monero is focused on that a more anonymous capability, whereas Bitcoin is only pseudo-anonymous. It's just identifying accounts changing. Whether or not your name is associated with that account is a separate issue. Governments are getting involved in mandating when somebody gets on a currency exchange to purchase Bitcoin that they have to give their name, so you know accounts. Thank you. Your point taken about revolts and opening mind to the ways Bitcoin could upset people. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the time you took for those details. Are we out of time, or go ahead?
Okay. First of all, I want to congratulate the speaker for having the courage to propose an argument for a currency that would limit government control and overreach in a central bank in former Eastern Europe. That's quite rare. And secondly, why not go for a currency that actually provides full anonymity, like Monero? Because as you well know, the only, let's say, anonymity provided by Bitcoin, it's actually pseudo-anonymity. At the moment when you need to transfer from Bitcoin to a fiat currency, or at any point when your Bitcoin gets in contact with other world economy, you lose your anonymity. And as you also well said, fiat money, like cash, provides better anonymity than Bitcoin. So basis on this, why not go further and choose something like Monero, which actually provides full anonymity to the users? It's much better, both in regards to protecting your own assets, and if it is, let's say, more adapted, it can also decrease in volatility. So far, it's been less volatile also than Bitcoin.
Thank you. I would just answer that for somebody who wanted to get at the answer to that question, use a systematic process to compare the currencies on their features. Thank you. And thanks.
Mihai Voicu, thank you for your presentation. I would like to stress following two challenges to your presentation, a part of already mentioned El Salvador legal tender, functional currency, and reduce corruption. I would like to challenge absolute freedom with the case of India, Bitcoin ban case, where India is a world largest democracy, and the second one on the safest technology versus massive cyber threats, especially within Asia, taking into consideration Japan. Now, apart of this, I would like to raise a question. Do you think, or do you consider, do you see any relevant aspect that central banks are losing their relevance? Thank you.
No, I don't. I do not think central banks are losing their relevance. And I particularly think they're extremely important in a time frame where people are questioning currencies and new methods of exchanging value are evolving. I think it makes them extremely relevant. Particularly. I hope I've answered your question. I'm happy to talk again after.
Hey, I like how the speakers before were constructive, kind, and progressive. About your presentation, I liked it because it was comprehensive and synthesized. So my question is this. In an evolved digital state such as Estonia, not in a background country that likes paper money, is there a scenario where the citizens adopt a cryptocurrency, maybe Bitcoin, in such large numbers that makes the local currency and the central bank irrelevant?
So, yes, I would say it's certainly possible for free individuals to just start choosing to transact in Bitcoin regardless of whether or not it's made legal tender in a particular country. You see people using Bitcoin to transfer money from, some country where they're working to earn a living for them and their family, but then send the money back to their family because the cost of sending the money is less than some of the traditional methods. So you already see people doing that. And I definitely see a scenario where you don't see a bunch of countries coming together or just individually choosing to make a Bitcoin legal tender, but individuals just start using it more than other countries in free societies. And so, yes, I see that as a possibility that plays out, which is part of the reason that I looked at this evaluation. Yes. Thank you. All right, it looks like that's it. Thank you very much for your time.